There is a moment in every impossible story where the world simply stops paying attention to what is supposed to happen and starts watching what actually does. This is that moment. He is 40 years old. 40! An age where footballers are usually commentators, coaches, or grandfathers watching from the stands with their grandchildren on their knee. An age where the body is supposed to have already told you the truth. That it's over. That it's someone else's turn now. That the posts belong to younger men with faster reflexes and fresher knees. Nobody told him that. Or maybe they did, and he simply didn't listen. On a June night in 2026, this man walked out of a tunnel and stood between two goalposts in front of the entire footballing world against Spain, ranked second on the planet. His own country, Cape Verde, an island nation of barely 500,000 people, was ranked 67th. On paper, it wasn't a football match. It was a mismatch, a formality, 90 minutes to be endured before the real contenders got down to business. Nobody told him that either. 7 times the ball came for him. 7 times it left disappointed. A clean sheet against one of the greatest footballing nations on earth. Not a fluke, a performance, a statement. A man playing not like someone hanging on to his career, but like someone who had spent his entire life quietly preparing for exactly this single night. By the final whistle, a small island had done something it had never done before. And the goalkeeper who made it possible was already, in that moment, being called something more than a footballer. A symbol, a folk hero, a grandfather figure to a nation watching a dream unfold in real time. Within days, millions of people who had never heard his name before were typing it into a search bar. Not his real name, Josimar José Évora Dias, but the one his grandparents gave him as a boy. The name that raised him. The name that would come to define him on the biggest stage football has to offer. Vozinha. This is the story of how a boy from a small Atlantic island, who wasn't even allowed to keep the name his parents first chose for him, spent 19 years crossing oceans, countries, and leagues most fans have never heard of, just to become, in the final chapter of his career, the most unlikely hero of a World Cup. Every story needs a beginning, and this one begins far from any stadium that matters, on the island of São Vicente, in the port town of Mindelo, on the 3rd of June, 1986. His parents had a name picked out before he was even born. They wanted to call him Valdano, in honor of Jorge Valdano, the Argentine forward who had helped his country lift the World Cup that very same year. It would have been a fitting tribute, a boy born in the shadow of a World Cup summer, named for one of its stars. But Cape Verdean authorities said no, the name wasn't permitted, and so his parents turned elsewhere for inspiration, this time to Brazil, and to a different player from that same 1986 tournament, Josimar, the attacking fullback whose surging runs down the flank had made him one of the stories of the World Cup. And so the boy was named Josimar, not for a goalkeeper, ironically, but for one of the most attacking defenders of his generation. Yet the name that would follow him his entire life didn't come from his parents at all. It came from his grandparents, the ones who actually raised him, who were there for the scraped knees and the long afternoons on dirt pitches, who gave him the nickname that stuck, long after Josimar became a name on official documents and passports. Vozinha. For years, growing up in Cape Verde, it was the only name anyone used. He played his early football under this name, first at local club Batuque, where he would stay until 2011, learning the trade on pitches far removed from the world's cameras. From there, he crossed town to city rivals Mindelo, still just a young goalkeeper from Mindelo, still years away from a single senior international cap. It wasn't until he left the islands entirely, until his football career took him across an ocean to Angola, that the name Josimar briefly became necessary again. In the locker room of his new club, there was another goalkeeper who also went by Josimar. 2 men, 1 position, 1 name. Something had to give. And so, out of simple necessity, the nickname his grandparents gave him as a boy became the identity the football world would eventually come to know. Not Josimar, not Valdano, the name that never was, Vozinha, carried from a dirt pitch in Mindelo all the way to a World Cup stage decades later. If football careers were straight lines, Vozinha's would be a piece of modern art, tangled, looping, doubling back on itself, crossing borders most footballers never even visit, let alone play in. It began, as it had to, at home. Batuque first, then Mindelense, the crosstown rivals, where he continued to develop his game on the island of São Vicente. But Cape Verde's domestic football, however proud its history, could only take a young goalkeeper so far. In 2012, opportunity called from across the ocean, Angola, and a club called Progresso do Sambizanga. He would stay there for 3 years,
quietly accumulating appearances, quietly becoming a more complete goalkeeper, far from the attention of European scouts.
Then, in an unusual twist, he came home. March 2015 saw him return to Mindelense, back in the São Vicente Island League, signing for what was meant to be a short 1-year stay. It turned into something special, a Cape Verdean championship campaign, with Vozinha in goal for nearly every match along the way, missing only the final itself.
But home was never going to be the final stop.
That same year, in July 2015, he made his first real leap into European football, signing for Zimbru Chisinau in Moldova's national division, a league far from the glamour of the continent's major competitions, but a genuine step onto European soil. A year later, in August 2016, he moved again, this time to Gil Vicente in Portugal's second division, the Liga Portugal 2. It was here that he built a reputation as a penalty stopper, saving 5 spot kicks across 32 appearances. The kind of statistic that quietly builds a goalkeeper's legend among those who actually watch the games.
Then came Cyprus. In June 2017, AEL Limassol came calling, and Vozinha would spend 5 years there, the longest single stretch of his career, appearing in over 100 matches for the Cypriot First Division side, becoming a fixture, a veteran, a trusted presence between the posts in a league that demanded consistency above flash. By August 2022, most goalkeepers his age would have been eyeing retirement. Instead, Vozinha signed with AS Trenčín in Slovakia's top flight, initially for just 6 months, with an option to extend. A short-term deal for a player some might have assumed was simply filling out his final seasons.
And yet, in July 2024, he returned once more to Portugal, this time to Chaves, still competing in the Liga Portugal 2, still lacing up his boots at an age when the football world assumes the story is already finished. 5 countries, multiple leagues, most of them well outside football's spotlight. 15 years of unglamorous, unheralded work, building without anyone quite realizing it toward one final, extraordinary chapter. While his club career wound through Angola, Moldova, Portugal, Cyprus, and Slovakia, an entirely separate story was unfolding, one measured not in clubs and transfers, but in caps for his country. It began in September 2012 in a qualifying playoff for the 2013 Africa Cup of Nations. Cape Verde, at home, faced Cameroon, a footballing giant by comparison, a nation with a rich history of African and World Cup football. And there, making his full international debut, was a young Vozinha, helping his side to a stunning 2-0 win in the first leg. 2 weeks later, in October, the second leg took the team to Yaoundé, into Cameroon's own backyard, into a hostile stadium, expecting to erase that deficit and move on. Cape Verde lost the match, 2-1. But on aggregate, they had done it. A team from an island nation smaller than many cities had qualified for its first ever major international tournament, and Vozinha had been in goal for
both legs of the achievement that made it happen. At the finals in South Africa in 2013, Cape Verde exceeded every expectation, advancing all the way to the quarterfinals before their run ended 2-0 against Ghana, one of the continent's traditional powerhouses. Vozinha would later concede the second goal of that match in a rare lapse, caught upfield attacking a corner kick as his side searched for something to change the score. It was a bitter way for the tournament to end, but it was also undeniably history. The birth of Cape Verde as a nation capable of competing on the continental stage, and the beginning of Vozinha's long relationship with his national team's goal. He would never forget that debut, that playoff, that away leg in Yaoundé. It was the moment a young goalkeeper from Mindelo stopped being simply a promising talent in Cape Verdean domestic football and started becoming something else entirely. The last line of defense for an entire nation's footballing ambitions. At the exact moment those ambitions were beginning to take shape on the world stage for the very first time. Between that first Africa Cup of Nations appearance and the moment the world would finally take notice of him, more than a decade passed. It is easy, in hindsight, to compress a career into its highlights: the debut, the World Cup, the headlines. But the truth of Vozinha's story lives in the years between those moments. The quiet, unglamorous accumulation of caps, tournaments, and disappointments that most fans outside Cape Verde never saw. In 2015, he returned to the Africa Cup of Nations for a second time, adding to the continental experience that would later serve him so well. The years that followed brought steady, unspectacular progress. Not every qualification campaign succeeded. Not every tournament ended in triumph. But Vozinha remained, tournament after tournament, the trusted presence in goal. By October 2020, in a friendly away to Andorra, he reached a milestone few Cape Verdean players before him had ever achieved: his 50th international cap, secured in a 2-1 win. A year later, the call came again for the 2021 Africa Cup of Nations, held in Cameroon, the same country where nearly a decade earlier he had helped qualify his nation for its first major tournament. And in 2023, he answered the call once more, appearing at yet another Africa Cup of Nations. By this point, something remarkable had happened, almost invisibly. Vozinha had quietly climbed to become the second highest capped player in the entire history of the Cape Verde national team, a living record of the country's footballing rise, stretching back to a time when qualifying for any tournament at all seemed like a distant dream. He was by now well into his 30s. Teammates half his age looked to him not just as a goalkeeper, but as an institution. Someone who had been there for every step of Cape Verde's transformation from footballing afterthought to a nation capable of dreaming bigger. Nobody, watching him marshal his defense in these years, could have known that his single greatest moment, the one that would make his name known across the entire globe, was still ahead of him, waiting on the other side of 40. And then, against odds that no serious analyst would have taken seriously even 5 years earlier, it happened. Cape Verde, a nation of roughly 500,000 people, smaller than many single cities in the countries they would soon be playing against, qualified for the 2026 FIFA World Cup. For context, consider what that actually means. This is a nation without the population of a mid-sized American suburb, taking its place on the biggest stage in world sport, alongside football superpowers with decades of infrastructure, generations of investment, and stadiums that alone could seat a meaningful fraction of Cape Verde's entire citizenry. It is, by almost any measure, one of the most improbable qualifications in the tournament's history. And there, in goal, set to make his World Cup debut, was a man now 40 years old. A goalkeeper who had spent 19 years grinding through leagues in Angola, Moldova, Portugal, Cyprus, and Slovakia,
who had accumulated caps quietly for over a decade, who had never asked for the spotlight and had rarely received it. He was about to walk into the biggest tournament in football, at an age when most of his contemporaries had long since retired. He was about to become the oldest player ever to appear in a nation's first World Cup match, a record that, remarkably, would only be set the day after another debutant, Curaçao's Eloy Room, had briefly held it himself. Two small nations, two improbable debuts, two goalkeepers, both defying the calendar, both stepping into a moment that football history says shouldn't belong to men their age.
For Vozinha, and for an entire island nation watching back home, the wait was finally, almost unbelievably, over. The dream that began with a playoff against Cameroon in 2012, the dream of belonging on the world stage, was about to become real in the most dramatic way imaginable. Spain, ranked second in the entire world, a footballing nation with a World Cup title, multiple European championships, and a production line of world-class talent that few countries can match. Cape Verde, ranked 67th, a nation playing in its first ever World Cup match against a footballing machine 40 spots higher in the world rankings.
On paper, it wasn't a contest. On the pitch, it became something else entirely. Vozinha made save after save, 7 in total across the 90 minutes, denying Spain's attackers time and time again. Each stop more improbable than the last, each dive drawing louder gasps from a global audience realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. When the final whistle blew, the scoreline read 0-0, a draw. For Cape Verde against Spain in a World Cup, it was better than most victories.
He was named Player of the Match. At 40 years and 12 days old, he became the oldest player to ever feature in a nation's debut World Cup match, breaking a record set just a single day earlier. He became the third goalkeeper over the age of 40 to keep a clean sheet in a World Cup match, joining a list that includes two legends of the position. And in the process, he moved into second place among goalkeepers over 40 for most saves recorded in a single World Cup match since records began in 1966.
The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, his personal social media following exploded past 17 million, fueled by major broadcasters and a wave of fans determined to celebrate a player who represented everything football fans love: perseverance, humility, and a refusal to let age write the ending of his story. But the story wasn't finished. On the 26th of June, he delivered a second consecutive clean sheet, this time against Saudi Arabia, a result that sent Cape Verde through to the knockout stage as runners-up in their group, a feat that only weeks earlier would have seemed like fantasy.
Then came the true test, the round of 32, and defending champions Argentina. What followed was a brutal, breathless contest, stretching all the way into extra time. Vozinha made 8 more saves, refusing to go quietly, refusing to let the champions have an easy night. In the end, Cape Verde fell 3-2. But nobody who watched that match remembers it as a defeat. They remember a 40-year-old man standing alone against the best team in the world and very nearly stealing the impossible. Back home, nobody remembers the scoreline against Argentina. What they remember is the fight, the image of a man twice the age of some of his opponents, throwing his body across the goal line again and again, refusing to let his nation's World Cup story end quietly. He was hailed in the aftermath not simply as a good goalkeeper, but as a hero, a word used carefully in football, and earned, in his case, over 19 years of unglamorous work across 5 countries before the world ever noticed.